Welcome back to Good Morning LaLa. And I am so honored because I love documentaries and my favorite thing in the world. Brent Huff, you are a documentarian and you have two incredible documentaries that I really want to talk about. Behind the Orange Curtain in Orange County. Talk about that one.
Well, Behind the Orange Curtain sort of came to me as a documentary that came to me in 2012. Natalie Costa, who's a friend of mine who runs a performing arts studio in Orange County, her daughter, who's a sophomore at Dana Hills High School, went to her first funeral. And a schoolmate of hers died of a drug overdose, 16 years old. She went to the funeral, it was packed, and several of the people had been to like up to 10 funerals that year. And the parents were saying something has to be done. So a group of parents who had lost their kids in the last year had me come down to Orange County to meet with me about making a documentary film. Wow. So it was a big room, it was packed, and each parent stood up and told me how they'd lost their child. And you could just, I mean, the emotion in that room was unbelievable because you can lose your job, you can lose your marriage, and things could always be worse. You lose a child, doesn't get any worse. That's as bad as it gets. So I'm dealing with that, and we actually raised the money at Kickstarter within a week because so many of these parents were they wanted to think that their child did not die in vain, that they were good kids. And I said when I started this documentary, I'm going to show everything. I'm going to go for the truth. Are you okay with that? And what I thought at the time, these were mostly rich people in South Orange County. So what I thought at the time was these are parents who just threw money at a problem and didn't really give their kids the attention. But that was not the case at all. These were hands-on parents that probably a lot of them were in denial because you can't tell with opioid drugs that they're high. You think they're just being petulant teenagers. With cigarettes, you can smell. With cocaine, they're sniffing or grinding their teeth. With pot, you can smell. With alcohol, you can smell. But with these opioid drugs, like Oxycontin, you can't tell.
It's so intense.
And two of the young men who died actually died in their parents' couch as they're watching television with their parents. So they're not out partying at raves or whatever. They were at home.
Wow.
They just went to the bathroom.
So I actually went to Dana Hills my junior year in high school. I was from Santa Barbara, went down there. And it's interesting growing up in California because, you know, there was so many drugs in Southern California. I was lucky enough to have an eating disorder instead of a drug addiction in that I had so many friends die. So many friends die from drugs and alcohol and car accidents and overdoses and da-da-da. And it was fascinating, but what's been even more fascinating is the pharmaceutical drugs that have come along that have just wiped out, taken people's lives like you can't believe. So tell us about the opiates, because it's heroin, but then opiates, oxycodone, right? I hear you take it once and it's like you're addicted.
For certain people, before I go on, Dana Hills, you know the nickname for Dana Hills now? Dana Pills.
Really?
I got that from the students there. In fact, we had one of the memorial services where we released balloons at Dana Hills High School, and they said this is just out of control. But what happens is, like, you might get these pills in your parents' medicine cabinet. You can get it from dirty doctors. And so you take a pill, and all of a sudden, all your problems go away. You know, a lot of these kids told me, you know, it's hard to navigate these high school years anyway because the insecurity is what you were talking about. And so that takes away that insecurity, and you feel like you fit in a little more. And that's the great thing about the drugs. So those lows, you know, cuts the edges, but it also cuts the edges on the highs.
And it's cheap. I mean, people are selling them right out of their lockers. That's how it was. Even I didn't grow up in Orange County. I grew up in Michigan. But it was so easy to do. They were in your pockets, throw somebody a 20 and there you have it.
And it doesn't look like it's a bad thing. It's a pill doctors give these. How bad can it get?
Yeah, it was a prescription. And that was the problem. Most people thought it was okay because it was a prescription that came from their doctor.
Right. And so what we did, when we were doing the undercover stuff, there was a Dr. Lisa Singh that was in Roland Heights, and a lot of these kids from Orange County, these hipster kids with money, were going to Roland Heights, which is off the 60 here, and they would go in and they get prescriptions from her, and she was just writing one after another. And so we did a little undercover with the camera inside, and she's the first doctor who got convicted of second-degree murder. She's now serving a 30-year sentence.
Wow.
So it's and it's expensive too. It's first expensive because Oxycontin is like $1 a milligram. But these kids want to do 80 milligram pills and they chop it up and snort it, whatever. But after a while you can't afford it, and that's when it goes into heroin. You get that same high for $6 as opposed to $80.
So interesting. So tell us about your fascinating, because I mean, obviously you must have you have some kind of a mission. We'll talk about your other documentaries coming up and stuff, but there must have been something in your life that said, I want to showcase and make a difference through documentaries.
I'm a parent. That was what got me. So I saw what these parents are going through, so I went from their perspective, that they felt helpless. There's nothing they could do to get their kids to stop taking these drugs. And so I talked to one woman she's in the film, where she would go up and drive in the hills, driving 100 miles an hour screaming because she knew she was going to lose her child. And she already talked to a mortuary about her son's funeral before it even happened. And so to have that pain constantly, and when I had screenings for this film, I've had two friends of mine, close personal friends of mine, they broke down afterwards crying and said, you have no idea, but my son's addicted to heroin. It's a dirty little secret that people are embarrassed to talk about. And a lot of times you'll see these obituaries where a kid that's 23 years old dies and they don't say the reason why. A lot of times it's a drug overdose and they're embarrassed to say. But so with this film, I'm trying to get people to talk about it. Don't be embarrassed by it. There's a lot of people. There's people in your neighborhood that this is affecting. There's people you know that's affecting. They may not talk about it, but let's get to the bottom of it. And another thing I want to bring up is when these kids start to overdose, there's a drug called Narcan. You know what Narcan is? It's like a nasal spray, and it snaps you out of it. So if you have a loved one who you think is addicted, you can go to Walgreens or CVS or whatever and get it, you know.
Wow.
And so have that on hand. I mean, some people might argue that you're sort of enabling that process, but it's better to save their lives and have that handy, if, you know.
That's great information.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So if they're on the pills, you feel like they're going too far, or whatever that is, you can give it will counteract it so that they don't.
Right. It's a nasal spray.
And it's an over-the-counter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Great to know.
Yeah. And another thing is the Good Samaritan law. So at these house parties that these kids go to, and one of them starts to OD, most people will not call 911 because they think they're going to get busted because there's drugs in the house. But with the new Good Samaritan law, you won't get busted. It's better to call, save a life, and not worried about going to jail.
So it's so profound. So I hear you saying so many great things here. One, of course, and thank you for this, is just spreading the awareness about it itself, right? Regulation, right, which is something that people work together around, but also in laws, right, but also intervention. And being proactive when you see there's a problem.
Right.
Awesome.
I love that. So let's talk about another kind of a drug, if you will, which is your next documentary, which is about a cult, which I think people, we may find a release and kind of going away from things through drugs. We can also sometimes find it through spirituality, withdrawing from culture and kind of alienating yourself that way. Tell us about your next documentary.
Well, it's called Welcome to the Beyond, and it's a documentary about a guy named Hoyt Richards. Hoyt Richards grew up privileged on the East Coast. His family spent their summers in Nantucket. He's smart. He went to Princeton, played football at Princeton, goes to New York City, becomes the first male supermodel. Life could not be better, all right? So then he gets stopped on the beach one day in Nantucket, and this guy says, you're different, you know that? You're smart, you're beautiful, you're different from everybody else. And he convinced him that he was from the Star Arcturus, and they formed this cult in New York City. And a lot of the Ford models, a lot of them went to Ivy League schools as well, were in this cult. And they were told to break away from your family. And so he disowned his family for 20 years. And he gave the cult $4.5 million. And it was all to achieve enlightenment.
Wow.
And then after 20 years, he's making his way back to his family and is going through recovery right now.
This story is so fascinating. It's almost unbelievable, to tell you the truth. What is it as a filmmaker that you were intrigued to actually capture the story?
Well, we were at the same agency in New York, and so when you go on photo shoots and stuff, you'd hear these rumors that some of the Ford models were in a cult, and you go, are you serious? Get out of here. No. And then there was, in 1990, there was a expose by Vanity Fair magazine, and it's like, holy crap, this really happened. There's a name saying, I know this person, this person, this person. And then fast forward to like 3 years ago, Ford models because I knew it as a filmmaker, had me film a Ford's model reunion here in Beverly Hills. And we're filming, I get to interview some of the icons like Cheryl Tiegs and Esme and some of the big people. And then I looked at my DP, director of photography, and go, that's Hoyt Richards. He was in a cult. Let's go talk to him. We went over there, and Hoyt was very open, and he talks about this and about what he went through, and so.
Who was the cult leader?
A guy named Frederick von Mears, who was also a model back in New York.
Wow,
Yeah.
interesting. So it was in the 80s, so I'm sure it had to be a spin-off of the Warner Earhart-esque probably whole scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating. And I think it's interesting because, a cult, it's interesting because a cult really is you're revering somebody that's still alive and following. But I think the definition for me around cult, because sometimes that could be a good thing, really for me it's about where it really harms people's lives. It destroys people's families, and it starts to really crumble their finances, their health, and everything over long term. So important to know that that can be a type of drug as well, right?
Well, it started in a good place. Hoyt told me they were doing good for people, and it was a spiritual thing, and then it just over a period of time got darker and darker and darker. It's sort of like, when you put a frog in water and it slowly it boils, and they don't know to get out. That's sort of what happened. It's just like you're slowly. He didn't believe he was in a cult. His family thought he was. They tried to do an intervention that went horribly wrong. But like I said, it started in a good place.
Wow. I'm curious, what is it that you want your legacy to be, Brent?
That's a good question. I don't know. I want to make great stories, and stories that actually affect people. I heard you talk earlier. I do scripted movies too, and some are good, some not so good. But I don't get from that what I get from documentaries that you might have changed my life. You brought an awareness to something that wasn't there, and it was entertaining but also informative. So that's what I'm trying to.
I love it. And documentaries, they have to have a twist, though. I think that a good documentary it shows kind of many sides, but it also doesn't take one perspective.
Right.
So how were you able to do that with even like that? I mean, hard to do that on drugs and behind the curtain, orange curtain, and then hard to do that with a cult because there's so many kind of preconceived notions.
Well, I did a documentary on the modeling industry called Chasing Beauty. And some of the models said I was too hard on the industry, that I go, it's not that bad. And then others said, no, you need to be more hard hitting. Well, there's parts of the modeling industry that are good, and there's parts that are dark. And so I just tried to be, fair and balanced.
That's good.
That's what I go into.
Well, and you did it very successfully. #1 fashion movie on IMDb, right?
Yes.
Chasing Beauty.
Yeah.
For those
that slipped in.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
For those watching who haven't seen it, what do you think is the biggest takeaway about the industry? What was the light you really shed on it?
Well, you can't really achieve what you see in the fashion magazines. Back when I was doing it, they didn't Photoshop everything. Everything is Photoshopped now. Everything. And for girls to be, 5'11" and a size 0, a size 2 is almost impossible. So there's eating disorders. And when I was in Paris and Milan, they encouraged the girls to smoke cigarettes, and they didn't frown about doing cocaine because it kept them thin. And then there's a shelf life, and it's really brutal, the shelf life. And it's harder on women than it is men because, I would introduce my agents to this model. I said, she's great. And they go, how old is she? I go, she's 23. And they go, that's way too old. Wow. They need to start at 14 or 15 years old to go to New York and Paris, Milan. So there goes your education, So you can't wait till you're out of college and then start your modeling career. It's too late. And then slowly the phone quits ringing, because there's a new, younger, model coming in. So it's the ugly part of beauty.
Right.
Yeah.
I think ageism will be the next big movement that we're going to see online for sure.
Oh, absolutely. In this town, it's like really brutal, And it's not just with the actors and the models, but it's with writers and producers that they think you're too old, that you're not relevant, you don't know what's happening anymore if you're a certain age.
Yeah, and 50% of Americans are over the age of 50. So, I mean, it's people purchasing are much older. So it's interesting, the power. Remember where we have the power as a people.
Right.
We're going to take it back.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're like, I'm your #1 fan because documentaries have touched my lives beyond anything else online. It's really important. And in today's world, we're so fast and have such short attention spans. Documentary is still a place that intrigues me. So keep up the amazing work.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Tell everybody where they can find and follow you.
My website is brenthuff.com. If you want to know more about Behind the Orange Curtain, there's a website, behindtheorangecurtain.net.
Thank you, Brent.
Thanks.
Stay tuned. We'll be back with more on Good Morning La La Land.